Well, to say it has been a frenetic week in politics is an understatement. From the RNC in Milwaukee to President Biden's COVID diagnosis and mounting pressure to step out of the presidential race.
North Central College political science professor Stephen Caliendo joining us now to discuss what's been going on this week. Thank you for being here. Always good to see you.
Good to see you, too. And you didn't even mention Judge Cannon dismissing the case against President Trump. That was within the week as well.
Yeah, it's been a crazy busy week on both sides. So let's talk about last night's speech. I want to get your reaction. But before we do, he talked about unity last night. So let's listen to what he had to say about that, and then I want to get your remarks. Oh, I apologize. Okay, well, he did speak of unity last night, and I'm curious, let me get your overall impression of the speech. And did he, in fact, create a unity when he said, I'm not just going to be the president for the Republican people, but for everybody?
Well, right. You can't just say it. You have to show that with actions, and he hasn't done that. The speech that was written for him seemed to be very good. It was really clear, I think, that you don't have to be an expert in nonverbal communication to see when he moved off speech and when he was on speech in terms of where his eyes were and how he was holding his body. And there was a real distinction between when he was ad-libbing and when he was staying on the speech. I think that his speechwriter set him up in a really good place after a very difficult couple of weeks for Democrats. But he just couldn't help himself with an audience there and ad-libbed so much that I think he put a lot of people to sleep, especially toward the end.
Let's get to Joe Biden. Publicly dug in. There are reports he's going to hit the campaign trail in earnest as soon as he's got this mild case of COVID behind him. Privately, the family, those in his inner circle, and we understand that inner circle is growing smaller these days because of all the leaks, they say he is at least considering the possibility of passing the torch to Kamala Harris or perhaps another candidate. If I were to be Chicken Little here and say that the White House is already lost, how important is it for him to consider the potential of losing the House and losing the Senate, because Donald Trump ostensibly seems to be pulling away, and we are talking about a potential landslide victory in November?
Right. I mean, I don't want to make any predictions about the presidential race at this point because we do have a long time before, not just November. Of course, voting starts before that. So there's a lot that can happen. But there's no question that I think that the sky is falling is an apt metaphor at this point, Scott, because they don't know what to do. If he gets out now, they have all the trouble with lawsuits that will be coming in key states about getting a Democratic name on the ballot. They have to figure out who the replacement's going to be and how they're going to make that happen. Not by the time they get to Chicago in 3.5 weeks, but really by the beginning of the month. So that's a problem. But if he stays in and he loses, of course, then his legacy is somewhat tarnished by the fact that he was unable to be successful in his reelection bid.
Let's talk about how complicated this becomes if, in fact, he does step aside. What is that going to mean? What's going to happen next? Do you think it could rejuvenate the Democratic Party? Because some people did not want him to run. The younger crowd has seemed to say, well, you know, we don't want to vote for him. We're not sure who we're going to vote for. And if he's not there anymore, could this cause a resurgence for the Democratic Party in popularity as far as Democrats?
Sylvia, if he would have dropped out right the day after that terrible debate performance, I think what you just described was a real possibility to get some energy behind somebody that folks were excited about. I think at this point, though, first of all, it's several weeks later. We're 3 weeks later, closer to the election time. But also, there's been so much division in terms of folks who are locked in, particularly Black Americans, who are locked in behind President Trump, and those who are calling the big donors who are calling for him to leave. And so I think at this point, even if he does on his own step aside, it'll be clear that he was pushed out. And that's going to create that allows there to be this simmering resentment from folks that didn't want him to be pushed out in the first place. I think if he would have made the decision on his own right after that debate performance, we'd be in a very different situation. Whatever happens over the weekend, though, things are not going to be looking good going into next week. That doesn't spell the end for a Democratic presidential run, but it's really bad. You wouldn't want the Republicans wouldn't trade places with the Democrats right now. I'll say that.
Okay, and real quick before we run out of time, for the first time in this campaign, we're going to see the unified Republican ticket hitting the campaign, hitting the road, and that is J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. Are they going to focus just on the battleground states, which seem to be growing? Virginia's in play now. Or are they going to, do you think, barnstorm the whole country? Because my understanding is Donald Trump has a chance to do what no Republican's done in 20 years, and that's win the popular vote. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, and that matters a lot to Donald Trump. He talks about it a lot. He didn't believe in 2016 that he lost the popular vote, even though he did. And certainly we know how he felt about 2020. So I think if he can win the popular vote, he'd be glad. But I'm telling you, my observations are that he has very smart people doing his campaign, working on his campaign, and leading it. They've done a great job to this point in managing money, managing his time, and I don't think it's a good use of resources to send him to places like Kansas, for instance. Now, if he can go to some places that are typically Democratic but might be leaning, that might be worth it. But I don't think getting more votes in the states he's going to win anyway is a good use of resources.
All right, Professor, always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more as the weeks arrive. Thanks for your time.
Have a great weekend.
You too.